and welcome. This is part 2 of The Bad Seed. As Sage impatiently waited for the girl to come down, she began to think of her parents, who'd been unable to have another child. They thought it would be nice if Sage had a sibling, so they'd begun taking foster parent classes, and if Sage was honest, she rather liked being an only child, although she knew that it felt like her mother wished she were a different kind of daughter. She never specifically said it, but she could hear it when she exhaled, when Sage declined her offer to get her nails done, or to wear the pretty skirt her mother had just had to buy for Sage, or when her mother asked if she could braid her hair. Sage was just a little rough around the edges, her dad called it. She liked comfort over fashion. She liked watching sports with her dad over a trip to the mall. Anyway, she didn't understand why her parents felt as though she'd be better off with a sibling. But here she was, with this girl in her house, already rude and late for breakfast. "Hey, sweetie," started Lucy. She picked up the brush from the top of the dresser and walked towards Penny, and without asking, as if it were the most normal thing in the world, as if she were her mother, she began to brush Penny's long auburn hair. "How did you sleep?" she asked. "Fine," replied Penny. "I see you found the clothes okay." "Yes," replied Penny. "Thank you so much. I love them all." "Oh, really? I was so worried that you wouldn't. I was always a girly girl, but Sage is a tomboy, and she'd rather wear t-shirts and ratty jeans. I had her wear something nice today for when she meets you. You think the room is okay?" She tilted her head to look into Penny's deep brown eyes. "Yes," Penny whispered. "It's perfect." Lucy pulled Penny in and hugged her head. "Wow, that's a relief. And you're a girly girl. It's going to be pretty tough for a bit, sweetie. But once you begin feeling better, get on your feet, maybe we can go on a little shopping trip and to lunch. I always used to do that with my mom. Anyway, it just made me feel special. Sage is great. She's funny and she's smart. You'll like her. She's just not the shopping type kind of a girl. So maybe we can try and get her to go with us. See how fun it is." "Okay," replied Penny. "Oh, geez. I'm so sorry. What am I doing? You poor thing. Let's get you some breakfast." As the two walked down the stairs, Penny heard Claire and Mr. Hancock talking to Evan, and as they got to the bottom, she saw Sage sitting on the couch, her arms crossed, wearing an awful pink sweater and a huge bow in her hair. She was dressed like a 2-year-old. She had brown hair, freckles, green eyes, light skin, almost pink in color. Her lips were red, as if she'd had a popsicle. Her cheeks were hot pink, conveying her anger. "Sage, honey, this is Penny. Penny, this is our daughter, Sage." Evan walked into the room. Penny put her head down and held out her hand, and Sage took it. Penny squeezed a bit harder than normal, but then again, so did Sage. A battle over who was higher on the food chain, the poor little girl whose parents had died, or the child of the kind strangers allowing her to live in their home. Penny let go first, and Sage smiled. "So, breakfast has been ready for a while," began Sage, and Lucy hushed her. "Sage, Penny is going through a lot. She needed the sleep. We're going to let her go at her own pace." She smiled at Penny, and Penny's eyes began to water until a single tear ran down her cheek. Evan walked over and bent down to be eye level with Penny. "Honey, it's all going to be fine. You feel all the feelings you need to, and let the adults worry about taking care of you. Just understand that we are here for you any time you want to talk. day or night. Penny put her head down and tears came flowing. Claire reached into her bag for a tissue as Ken walked towards the girl. Sage asked if she could be excused to go to breakfast, and her mother quickly glanced in her direction and said, "Yes, dear, of course," and quickly went back to dealing with Penny. Ken stayed most of the day, as did Claire, and they found out about any extended family that Penny might have. There was one aunt who worked as a freelance writer and was currently in Germany. Other than that, no other family. There was a large sum of insurance money, and it was left to Penny, of course. The funeral plans would be made by the aunt, but she said she felt ill-equipped to care for the child. It was likely that unless Penny was adopted, she'd spend the rest of her childhood in a foster home, unless Lucy and Evan agreed to keep her there in a stable environment. Maybe someday adopt her, or not, whichever they decided, and after that Penny would be on her own. She had a lawyer who was in charge of her parents' estate and would figure out the inheritance issues. If she were to be adopted, then a monthly allotment could be used by the adopted parents towards the care of Penny, and by the end of the day, it seemed that most every urgent situation had been dealt with. While the adults attended to whatever was going on with Penny, Sage and Penny were basically left to their own devices, with frequent check-ins with Penny to make sure she was okay. Did she need anything? Did she want to talk yet? Did she understand what was happening? And much crying between her parents, Claire, and Penny. Sage began to ask her questions. "So, what school did you go to?" "I guess you'll be going to my school now. What are the names of your friends? Do you have any boys you like?" Penny said no. Sage told her about a boy in her class, Luke. She really wanted him to ask her to the spring formal. "What were your mom and dad like? Are you sad?" That made Penny cry again, and Sage was instantly chastised for that. "What bands do you like?" And Penny rattled off a few. None that were on the posters in her bedroom, though. Penny just picked some random popular bands and singers. Sage told her the bands she liked, and most of those bands were the ones on Penny's walls. Penny sized up Sage. They probably would have been friends if they'd met at school. She was the type of girl that Penny connected with, but Penny wasn't wanting to connect. When it was time for dinner, the doorbell rang and 3 large pizzas were delivered. "Oh, Penny," started Lucy. "I forgot to ask if you like pizza," and then all the adults began saying that they'd go get her something else if she didn't, and Sage was already tired of this girl. This perfect girl who was commanding all the attention. Sage knew, of course, that it would be terrible to lose your parents, and the thought of it made Sage cringe, even though she didn't feel super close to her mom. But still, it hadn't even been 24 hours. But there was just something that she didn't like about Penny. Or maybe she was jealous. That was possible, too, if she was honest with herself. She was an only child, after all. Months had passed, and Penny was attending the same school as Sage. Penny had become Lucy's shopping partner and was stuck wearing all the clothes that Lucy had picked out for her. The clothes she'd come in that cold night had been thrown away. Her band t-shirt, her ripped jeans, even her coat were gone. Penny had made a few friends at school, including Luke, with whom she had a class with. He was very nice and good-looking. She made him laugh, and he had the best laugh she'd ever heard. Sometimes he would walk her to a couple of her classes, and he introduced her to all of his friends. Sage was in his same friend circle, and Penny really liked everyone. They'd have study groups in the library, and Lucy would let Sage and Penny go because they were together, and she felt safe. Sage was always trying to get Luke's attention. "Hey, Luke, have you seen this article about night service?" That was Luke's favorite alternative band. Sage had immersed herself in knowing everything there was to know about the band. Penny had been listening to them for a few years now, and one day she made a comment about a really old song. Luke told her that He'd never known anyone who had heard that song, and that it was his favorite. Sage glared at Penny, and as they were walking home, she stopped and grabbed Penny's arm. "You listen to me, girly girl. I told you your first day in my house that I like Luke, and you'd better watch your step. Do you understand me?" Penny felt Sage's hand squeeze her arm as they were just a few feet away from the driveway, and she caught a slight movement at the side of the house as she looked into Sage's eyes, and her eyes began to water. With Sage still holding her arm, she began, "I'm sorry. I just miss my friends and feeling like I fit in somewhere. It's been really hard." Evan had been taking out the trash and saw the two girls. It was dusk, but he could make out the body language, and he began to walk over. As he did, he could hear Penny crying, see Sage holding her up her arm. "Hey, what's up, guys?" he asked. He knew it was hard on Sage to be sharing her parents, her home, her life with Penny. But he had spoken to Sage about the difficulties that Penny was going through and how Sage really needed to understand and be compassionate. Penny slowly looked at Sage's hand, and Sage let it go. "Nothing, Daddy. Penny is just having a rough time. We were just talking." "Is that right, Penny? You're having a rough time? You two were just talking?" he asked, knowing that Sage could throw a serious temper tantrum occasionally, and that he felt there was more to this than just that. "Yes, sir. That's right," Penny answered, sniffing, looking at Sage in the eyes. "You sure?" asked Evan again. "Daddy." She said yes, and Sage skipped over to him. "Who's playing tonight?" she asked, referring to the game on TV that they'd watched together, and off they went. Penny rubbed her arm. 2 nights later there came a knock on their door as Sage and Penny were setting the table for dinner. Lucy looked out the window and asked, "What's Luke Kemp doing here?" "What?" asked Sage. "Seriously? Oh my God! Penny, how's my hair?" Penny slowly looked up, assessed Sage's usual messy hair, and handed her a hairband that was wrapped around her wrist. Sage put her hair into a high pony. Lucy had never heard Sage be concerned about her looks and was thrilled to see that Penny might just be having an influence on her, as Penny's hair was always perfectly brushed back into a ponytail or a bun. She'd wear cute skater skirts with a collared sweater, leather flats, and just a touch of mascara. Sage was still wearing mostly black anything with ripped jeans and Vans. Evan answered the door as Penny and Sage strained to hear their conversation. "Penny, can you come here, sweetie?" called out Evan. Sage's cheeks turned bright red. Penny went to the door. "Hey, Pen," said Luke. He looked strange. "Hey, Luke." Evan asked if he'd like to step in, and he replied, "Yes, sir." And it all seemed strange to Penny. "Hey, Pen," he said again, and again Penny said, "Hey, Luke." Sage came into the room. "Oh, hey, Luke, what's up?" Her voice was bright and shiny, and she tucked a stray piece of hair into her ponytail. "Hey, Sage," Evan broke in. "There's enough hay in here for a barn." And he laughed. Sage rolled her eyes. I just came to ask if..." And just then, Sage broke in and stood between him and Penny. "Yes!" she said excitedly. Luke quickly looked at Sage. What?" "Yes!" said Sage. "I will go to the spring dance with you." Then she sort of punched him in his upper arm. "Thanks." And there it was. Evan quickly looked at Lucy as Lucy was moving into the living room, ready to swoop in and save the day. Sage," she started. Penny took a step back, and now her face was red. Lucy looked between the girls and Luke. Hi, Luke, she said, and Sage was still talking. Dude, I can't believe you look this nervous. Sage turned to look at Penny and squinted her eyes so quickly that it was barely noticeable. You know, Sage, I think that, began Evan. Sage, honey, started Lucy. Okay, great then, said Luke. Yeah, okay then. And he looked past the small crowd that had gathered and at Penny, as Penny shrugged her shoulders ever so slightly, and he tilted his head just a bit. Gotta go then, he said quickly and left the house. Both Lucy and Evan looked at Penny, who had turned away to walk up the stairs, pulling the ponytail holder out of her hair in one quick jerk and throwing it onto the ground. The next 2 months went by with Sage doing all she could do to turn Penny's friends against her, spreading rumors, calling her names, but Luke never listened to the Sage, and he and Penny became even closer. Sometimes he'd pass her notes between classes. They always went to the school functions as a group, so Sage would be there too. They had a school carnival, and at the end of the year, they went to an ice skating rink. Penny had never skated before, and Luke helped her. Penny's friends were coming back around, and when they were home, Sage was becoming more and more cold towards Penny. One night, Evan and Lucy asked the girls to come downstairs to have a family meeting. On the way down the stairs, Sage looked at Penny and said, "My family meeting," under her breath. The girls sat down, one on the left seat and one on the couch. Evan was sitting by Penny, and Lucy by Sage. Evan started. "Listen, we've been talking about something, and we've come to a conclusion that we want to tell you." He turned to Penny, and Lucy put her hand on Sage's lap and began to pat her. She was grinning from ear to ear. "Penny, we'd like to adopt you if you'd take us as your new family. Now, we know we can't replace your mom and dad, but we'd love to call you our daughter." Lucy began crying so loudly that it made Sage jump as Lucy ran to Penny's side, leaving Sage sitting on the left seat. Penny cried, like she always does, thought Sage, and said, "Yes, I'd love that." "So, what do you think, Sage? You girls will be sisters," said Evan excitedly. "That's so great," smiled Sage. "I am so happy," she said in the highest tone of voice she could manage. "Welcome, Penny, my sister." And she went over to give Penny a hug, and Penny could hardly breathe as her ribs were being crushed by the force of the squeezing. 2 weeks later, as the exciting news was still being talked about, and everyone was being told that Penny was going to be a member of their family, Penny walked up the stairs and stopped by Sage's room. "Hey, Sage, do you want some lemonade?" And Sage jerked the glass from her hand. "Thanks, girly girl," she said snidely. Penny went to her room to do her homework. She was laying on the floor, on her stomach, with her legs bent and crossed, as she read from her history book. Sage came in to sit on the bed. She was holding her glass of lemonade, and as she walked by, she pretended to trip as though she would spill it on Penny. Penny barely looked up from her book. "You know, even if you're adopted, you're still not their real daughter, right? You're like a stray kitten whose mommy ran off, and my parents feel sorry for you. But they're never gonna love you like they love their real daughter, girly girl. You're a glorified stray kitten," she hissed out of her mouth. Penny didn't look up. "You know what, Sage?" she started. "What, kitty?" snapped Sage as she got down on the floor and knelt next to Penny. "The internet. You can look up anything at all." "What are you talking about, kitty kitty?" sneered Sage. "You looking for a pet shelter?" "I once looked up how to turn the brakes off of a car without it showing." "What?" asked Sage. You can look it up. There are detailed instructions. My mom is pregnant. I didn't want a sibling. I don't share well. Are you crazy, girly girl? Said Penny, feeling a bit woozy, the room spinning just a bit. You're crazy and a liar. I'm going to tell my parents, said Sage as she sat down on the floor. No, you're not. Penny sat up now and looked into Sage's eyes, looking closely, bringing her head closer to Sage's. Nope, you're not, she whispered. You know that bush out front with the white and pink flowers? Penny asked Sage, and Sage whispered. Yeah. Well, Sage, that's called an oleander bush. It is highly toxic, very poisonous. I mean, really poisonous. The thing is, though, you don't find the poisons in an autopsy. You'll just have a massive heart failure. Poor thing. You're so young, too. Sage set her glass down, all wobbly. She looked at it. It was blurry now. She looked back at Penny. Yes, you're catching on. It won't take long. The internet says 15 minutes max, and by the look of you, I'd say it's going to be much shorter than that. Penny picked up the glass and took it into her bathroom. She rinsed it out, and when she walked back into the bedroom, she poured half of her lemonade into the glass. Here you go, Sage. It's freshly squeezed lemonade. You look like you could use a sip. My mom made it. Thank you for coming to my channel. If you're not already and you'd like to be, please subscribe. If you liked this story, please give it a thumbs up and share it. If you'd like to be notified when I have new content, go ahead and hit that bell. And if you'd like to support this channel, please consider doing so through Patreon. Good night.